Hello. I'd like to give you an outline of what I want to speak about today. Let's use the correct calendar. Fourth time is a charm. I have 11:11 solved and the day and hour revealed, and two secret messages, one in the calendar and one with the Comet of the Century. I'm Dr. Chris Zimmer, and let's get started. All right, so I had a comment from the last video where we were looking at the sliver of the new moon, trying to do this on the Hebrew calendar, which obviously didn't work out. But Paul Timson, 6674, made a comment, and he says very bluntly, nope. Tishrei 1 is called Libra 1, 183 days after Passover, Aries 14. So he's pointing us to a different calendar, a very ancient calendar right off the bat. This century Libra 1 is October 31st, Halloween, so he's pointing towards the last day on the 84-week timeline, and then he gives an account. 1910, it was October 30th, 1790, and so on. And then he talks about the error that was incorporated into the Gregorian calendar by Pope Gregory in 1582. He removed 10 days, and that moved the days up from 17 to 27th of October, and then he goes on talking about that error, and we're not going to concentrate on that. I'm going to do it a different way. There's actually a much simpler way to correct for that error over all those years, and I'll show you that in a moment. But he says it's moving. The day is hidden because it moves. Very, very good. He says there always is a 183-day gap between the cross and Libra 1, half a year. It's solar, not lunar. We walk in the day, not by night. We tell time by the sun, not by the moon. And then he says Jesus is compared to the sun. And the Essenes, now he's pointing us to the correct calendar. The Essenes had a solar calendar. And then he looks at Aries is given to the tribe of Gad, the constellation. So he's matching up constellations with the months here. He put a partial table in, and I've included a complete table from betamuna.org, and then I added on to it. I put month 1 through 12 on the left-hand side. But anyway, basically, he was just trying to show the correspondence between month 1, or Aries 1, and Tishrei, which is the original Hebrew month, and then the Hebrews changed it to a Babylonian luni-solar calendar, and then it became Nisan. And then looking at the 7th month, he calls it Moazanim, which is the original Hebrew, and tribe of Dan. And then the Babylonian, from the Babylonian, is Tishrei. That's what we know it as today from that lunisolar calendar. And even in E.W. Bullinger, The Witness of the Stars, he talks about the 7th month. The ancient Akkadian name for the 7th month, which was the month when the sun was in the sign now called Libra, was Tulku, which means the sacred mound or altar. So even in the ancient, even from E.W. Bullinger, he's telling us there's this correspondence between the months and the constellations. So we need to find month 1, day 1, and then month 7, day 1 from that. Here's the layout of the constellations along with all of the tribes, and this is given in Numbers 2. The layout of the camp is given in Numbers 2, and it also corresponds with, month number 1 is Tishrei, also called Nisan, is tribe of Judah, and then the 7th month we're looking at is tribe of Ephraim, and it's also called Moznaim in the ancient Hebrew, and Babylonian would be Tishrei. So what we need to do, and the problem is, the constellations not evenly spaced, and there are no clear demarcations between them, but we'll solve that problem with a very simple method. Okay, so first let's lay out the calendars. The Gregorian, Julian, Coptic, these are solar. Solar calendars have a 365-day year, which is extended to 366 once every 4 years. That's the leap year. The 4-year period mean is 365.25 days, and that gives an average solar year. The next would be the Hebrew Babylonian in source lunisolar calendar, a variation of the solar calendar in which the moon phase is included with years marked by a whole number of lunar months. The Hebrew calendar consists of months of 29 or 30 days, which begin and end approximately the time of the new moon. As 12 such months comprise a total of just 354 days, an extra lunar month is added every 2 or 3 years, so that the long-term average year length closely approximates the actual length of a solar year. Okay, so this is a much shorter year. In fact, the Zadok that we'll just talk about is 364, and this is 10 days shorter. So let's talk about the Zadok, Enoch, Jubilees, Qumran, which is solar-based. And the Zadok priests, of course, were apparently living at Qumran because of the find of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that's based also on the Enoch 1 and Jubilees calendar. But the problem with looking at Enoch is a lot of the information is missing, but seems to have been found at Qumran. And also with some research, we've reconstructed some of the rules. And I'll give a reference to that a little bit later. The Qumran calendar is based on a solar year of 360 days. That's the base year. 1 year for every degree of the constellations in the sky, 360 degrees, with 4 intercalary days added, which serve as transition points for each season, for a total of 364 days per year. A 7-day intercalary week is inserted once every 5 or 6 years in order to keep the Sabbath day from changing its day of the week. The 360 days are comprised of 12 months, having 30 days each. The months are simply numbered and named, month 1, month 2, month 3, and so on. Recent research has determined that the first day of the new year is calculated by finding the first Wednesday or fourth day after the vernal equinox. Therefore, month 1, day 1 is New Year's Day. 1-1, which this may be another possible representation of the 11 that everyone's been seeing. So let's talk about that. Many are seeing 11-11, and we had a number of instances, 2 11-year-long signs, galactic alignments in 2012 and 2023. Then we had 2 annular solar eclipses over Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2012 and 2023. So 2 11-year-long signs. And then we found dual conjunctions starting in 2001, which appear to depict 11-11 in the sky. And then 2024 calendar gave us 7-1 on the Gregorian was the 11th day of summer, and 7-1 on the Hebrew was the 11th day of fall. And then, of course, Tishrei 1 or 7-1 is what we're looking for, because 4 books of the Bible appear to give us the rapture date in 2024 as Tishrei 1. And then finally, 2-11 or 2 times 11, if you will, and incidences of 22, which is 11 plus 11, may also be factors. Now, I believe the reason for seeing the 11-11 is it's talking about the calendar. It's trying to point us to the right calendar. And we have 11 days in error. We have the Gregorian Hebrew calendars versus the Zadok calendar, and then 11 intercalary days. The difference between the Gregorian and Hebrew calendar years, 365 minus 354, is 11 days. Zadok calendar intercalary days, we have four gates, or 4 days that have to be inserted into the calendar at the end of each season, and 7-day intercalary week once every 5 or 6 years. So you add those together, the intercalary days, and we have 11 days. So we need to use the Zadok Qumran calendar. This is pointing us towards the correct calendar. Some related background before we get going. The Dead Sea Scrolls were initially found in caves near the Dead Sea, Qumran, in 1946 and 47, and that may be why those numbers were showing up in the timeline, 46 and 47. They date from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st. Archaeologists have long associated the scrolls with the ancient Jewish sect known as the Essenes. In 1950, radiocarbon dating on a piece of linen found in one cave placed it at 33 CE plus or minus 200 years. Paleographic dating by linguistic analysis by Cross and Avigad dates fragments from 225 BCE to 50 CE, so let's keep that range in mind. The same fragments were later analyzed using radiocarbon dating and were dated to an estimated range of 385 BCE to 82 CE with a 68% accuracy. The Essenes were a mystic Jewish sect during the Second Temple period that flourished from the 2nd century BCE to the 1st century CE. So this all seems to line up pretty good. And then I just threw this in here. Daniel 7:25 talks about the Antichrist, and then he'll think to change times and laws, and that seems to indicate a change in calendar. And if we look back at the prototype, or the sort of the original Antichrist, so to speak, the Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who lived from 215 BC to November-December 164 BC, outlawed Jewish religious rites and traditions, and the temple in Jerusalem was changed to a syncretic Greek-Jewish cult that included worship of Zeus. And then I put in from another source, and I'll show you that source later on too, is he imposed the use of lunar-based Babylonian Greek calendar. So you've got this lunar-based, or this lunisolar calendar that's used in the temple now after it's been forced on them, and it's still used to this day. So the original calendar that had its sources in Jubilees and Enoch 1, was pushed out. And then just a few more bits of information. Lamech, the etymology of his name is uncertain, but perhaps means strong man or strong youth. And then Genesis 5:28, when Lamech had lived 182 years, he had a son, which was Noah, and this represents a birth. And then in Genesis 5:31 also, Lamech lived a total of 777 years, and then he died. So that also represents fulfillment. All right, so let's look at that calendar, the Zadok 364-day calendar, in a circle. And if we use that 182 days that we got from Lamech, that points from Passover, Aries 14, the first day of redemption. That was the crucifixion of Christ. And then, of course, 3.5 days later is resurrection and ascension. And then we count 182 days to the other side of the Zadok calendar, exactly half of a Zadok year. Then we come to Tishrei 1, which can be assigned Libra 1, and that represents by Lamech a birth. Now, this is not an exact equinox, half year, so it's not real light versus dark days, but it is symbolic. This is 182 days, gives us half of the year in symbolic light and half in darkness. The correct calendar, having 11 intercalary days, is in the symbolic light, and then 2 erroneous calendars, or 2 that are non-biblical, are 11 days apart. So there's your 11 again. And if we talk about the Zadok calendar, we have 4 seasons, 91 days each, 3 30 days months, plus 1 intercalary day in each season. And by equinox, we would have a season of day and season of night, but this is shifted from the equinox by, I think, about 14 days. So what else? The day of the Lord, 1 Thessalonians 5. You are all sons of light and sons of the day. So there's where that comes from. And then speaking of the heavens, Psalms 19:5 and 6. In them he has set a tabernacle for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber and rejoices like a strong man. There's that reference to Lamech, to run its race. So again, this reference to half the year in light and half the year in darkness. And then redemption on the one side and birth on the other, 182 days apart. Okay, vernal equinox, the measurement. Here are the references. This one comes from Asherit Dead Sea Scrolls, on YouTube. And then some of the previous information about the Antichrist and the Babylon calendar and all that came from Eddie Chumney, the Zadok Priestly calendar. So let's go through. This is from Asherit. Modern observatories calculate vernal equinox, sunrise, and sunset times in different ways. For example, if you look at timeanddate.com or the Farmer's Almanac to view the lengths of day and night, you'll see an apparent discrepancy generally between the 16th of March and the 20th of March. This occurs because the times recorded are from the moment the top of the circle of the sun touches the horizon for sunrise times, and when the bottom circle of the sun touches the horizon for sunset times. The Dead Sea Scrolls indicate that the sun is viewed from the center or the diameter of the sun, not from the top or bottom, which only makes sense to get an exact measure. This creates about an 8-minute difference, plus 4 minutes to sunrise and sunset times. So while March 16th looks like it has equal day, equal night, it is actually still approximately 8 minutes off. And March 20th will appear to be 8 minutes off when it is actually equal day, equal night. So we need to keep this in mind since we're going to be using those vernal equinox times from the observatories. We need to correct 8 minutes. Finally, the precession of the equinoxes, motion of equinoxes along the ecliptic, the plane of Earth's orbit caused by the cyclic precession of Earth's axis of rotation. And in compiling his famous star catalog, and this was completed 129 BCE, right about in the middle of the time of the Essenes, the Greek astronomer Hipparchus noticed that the positions of the stars were shifted in a systematic way from earlier Babylon measures. This indicated that it was not the stars that were moving, but rather the observing platform, the Earth. Such a motion is called precession and consists of a cyclic wobbling in the orientation of Earth's axis of rotation with a period of 25,772 years. The precession of the equinoxes causes the position of the celestial poles to drift through the constellations. So we have this complete drift through 12 constellations at a continuous rate of roughly 20 arc seconds per year. So that seems small, but about 1 moon diameter per century. So this is quite a bit as it accumulates. So precession must be accounted for in our calculations. We need to find a reference date. So here we go. We're into the calculations now. We can estimate the approximate midpoint for use of the Essene calendar. Let's take the paleographic dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls, 225 BCE to 50 CE, and then the Essenes flourished from 2nd century BCE to 1st century, 200 BCE to 100 CE. So let's adjust our range to fit within that. So the adjusted dating range is 200 BCE to 50 CE. The mean of that adjusted range is 125 BCE. There is our reference date. And interestingly, this also corresponds to our find of 125 degrees from the edge angles of New Jerusalem City in Revelation, which we've looked at many times and also looked at it on the timeline, and also seems to correlate with Revelation 12:5 when the child was caught up to God and to his throne. The difference between the average solar year and the Zadok calendar year, 365.25 minus 364, that again gives us a 125 and 1.25 days. So we seem to have two witnesses to this. All right, let's go to Stellarium and take a look at 125 BCE, and we find the vernal equinox that year on 323 at 1741, and that's local mean standard time. We also see, and this is interesting, and it seems to be telling us we found the right year because there is an 11-11 configuration. Only this time the sun is not in the middle. We simply have the sun and Jupiter, and then we have Saturn and Mercury linked up together. And Mercury could be saying that this is a message, 11-11. Okay, so let's look at the date, 323 in Strong's is showing, proclaiming, announcing, and the time 1741 is glorious, gorgeously, honorable. So we seem to have a good sign there. Let's also take note of the supergalactic longitude and the ecliptic longitude J2000. The ecliptic is going to be fixed, so that's going to give us our more accurate measurement. The supergalactic longitude is not going to be quite as accurate, but we'll actually find some messages in that. And the supergalactic plane is not quite perpendicular to the celestial equator, and that's why it's not quite as accurate as the ecliptic longitude. So, but we're going to use both of those to back out what we need. What we're going to do is we're going to take the position that we see the sun in here in 125 BCE, and we're going to transfer it to 2024. So we know when the sun is, when the Essenes were looking at the sun entering Aries. This would be looking at the first day, towards the first day, using their rules. So if we transfer this vernal equinox to 2024, this is where it appears. Same place. We're doing this by ecliptic longitude, J2000, which is fixed. And we get the vernal equinox of 125 BCE transferred to 419 at 13:43:50 p.m. IDT. Okay. Now, if we transfer by supergalactic longitude, we get a little bit of a different message here. We get, let's see, same supergalactic longitude as VE, the vernal equinox on 125 BCE, and this gives us 419 at a time of 18:059. And watch what happens when we increment the time one more second forward, the twinkling of an eye, if you will. We go to 1810, and we get Strong's 1810 suddenly, which is used 5 times. Suddenly, and the number 5, which indicates the 5th moed is going to be fulfilled in 2024. All right, and something interesting here too. If we look back at the year that Jesus was born, 4 BCE, we get a date for the vernal equinox of 323 and a time of 1918, sorry. If we look at the 323, it says showing, proclaiming, announcing. If we look at it with the year included, 4323, we get confer, communicate, impart. And then from the time 1918, we get marry. So it's as if to say that even from Jesus' birth, he was meant to marry. And of course, who is he marrying? Who's the bride? That's the church. That's us. One more thing I just wanted to add is the year shows up as -3 because in Stellarium there is a 0 year, and in reality there is no 0 year, so we have to correct for that. And this one I did purely by accident. I was looking at the beginning of the ranges for the Essenes, and one of them showed 250. And I actually put in 250, but I didn't correct for it. I forgot to, so this would actually be 251 BCE. But if we look at the date, 325 and 251 BCE at 5:10:31, we get a message of deliver in Strong's. So this would be before the vernal equinox in 125 BCE. So it's as if we get another message saying deliver or deliverance. Deliver as in delivering a baby, and deliverance as in we are delivered from this world. Okay, crunching the numbers. Here comes the answer, and this is going to amaze you. It amazed me when I found it. It just completely blew me away. If we start at a location in Jerusalem, and we're using the ecliptic longitude J2000, 29 degrees, 31 minutes, 41.8 seconds, from our reference, which of course was 323, 125 BCE, 1741 LMST. Okay, so that's, I know that's long, but that's our reference, and then we transferred it to 419, 2024 at 1343, right? So we want the difference. We want the change in vernal equinox all the way from 125 BCE to the present. So we take our present vernal equinox in Jerusalem is 320, and then we subtract and we get the difference. We get the actual precessional change, and that's 30 days, 8 hours, 37 minutes, and 50 seconds. So in all that time, since 125 BCE to the present, that precession has drifted 30 days and some odd hours and minutes and seconds. If we change the location to Mazatlan, and we have to do that because that's where we actually got the time was given on April 7th this year by the moon occulting Venus at that time of 8:53:23, then we get 319, which is the vernal equinox this year. It's 1 day earlier in Mazatlan, and by the rules of the Zadok New Year, we have to add 1 day because the first Wednesday after the vernal equinox is 320. So that becomes our new year, apparent Zadok New Year. I say apparent because we're doing this by precessional drift. Add precession correction, and then we can add that to the day that we found for the vernal equinox now, the new year. We can add that 30 days, 8 hours, add the time to it, or add the precessional drift, the correction. We get 419 at 8:37:50, so we added in the time, and that becomes month 1, day 1, adjusted Zadok New Year. So now we have, not only do we have the day, the 419, but we also have the time included. Okay, so we take that 419, 8:37:50 a.m., we have to add 13 days to bring it up to the day of the cross. That would be the first day of Passover, which it would be month 1, day 14, and that occurs on May 2nd at that time, 8:37:50 a.m. But we have to do a little more correction. We have to take that May 2nd and add 182 days to it to come to month 7, day 1, and that brings us to October 31st at 8:37:50 a.m. So we've added 13 days to take us to the first day of Passover, and then we know it's half a year, or half a Zadok year, which is 182 days. We add that, and that brings us to October 31st. So we're doing this to the exact instructions of the Zadok calendar. And so we're getting around making any errors of, having to look at Pope Gregory and all the other errors over the years. This is direct. We have to add 16-minute correction for 2 observances of the vernal equinox. They were both 8 minutes off each. So we have to make a total of a 16-minute correction, and that takes us to October 31st, 2024, 8:53:50 a.m., and that's Mountain Standard Time. So, month 1, day 1, or what we call Tishrei 1, is October 31st, 2024, 8:53:50 a.m. MST. But there's something in that time. We've seen that time before, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But let's go to some additional things that happen on that day, on 10/31, which is Halloween. If we look at the conjunction between the moon and Spica, grain of wheat and all that, which is in Virgo, and we get a time of 5:5:5:5, and that 5:5:5:5 should be a reference to the 555 plus 5 that we found in the timeline from 2 different sources. That day count led to Feast of Trumpets 2024. Of course, it was the wrong Feast of Trumpets because we weren't using the right calendar, but the message is still there nevertheless. And of course, this points to the 5th Moed, which will be fulfilled in 2024. So everything seems to be converging. We also have a moon Spica appulse just shortly after that at a time of 6:70. Israel captured East Jerusalem during the Six-Day War in 1967, uniting the city under Israeli control. So this happening shortly after what seems to be indicated as the rapture seems to be telling us that God is going to be concentrating back on Israel shortly after. And finally, on 10/31, we have another 11:11 in the sky, but this time going back to what we've seen since 2001, the sun is in the middle of that. And then if we look at the time, 5:53, this is from Jerusalem, we get wait for, look for. And then that's used in Romans 8:19, for the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. And of course that is a kind of roundabout way of saying the rapture. And then, let's see here, Strong's 17:53, the time working, effectual working, operation strong. Ephesians 1:19 is where it's used, and then that speaks of God's mighty power. So this may be alluding to God's mighty power in order to pull this off. This is the rapture at this time. So this gets something like out of Indiana Jones. And let's go back to the 84-week timeline. That gave us all the information we need. It gave us 555 plus 5. That took us to Feast of Trumpets. So that gives us the message that this is going to happen on the Feast of Trumpets. We got 488 force and Harpazo, to seize by force, carry away. That tells us what. And then the 84 weeks, of course, takes us right to the end, October 31st, the end, or the highest point, it's also meant to say. And the time is in there too, 4/7, the moon occults Venus, 8:53, and then the day count from that to Harpazo, is another word for rapture, is 8:53. So we get a lot of components there telling us about the rapture, which is about to happen, and then pointing to the end. Okay, so let's go back to the Blood Money Prophecy by Scott Clark that we looked at a long time ago. And it shows Judah selling Joseph for 20 pieces of silver back in 1895 BCE. Joseph's coat was dipped in goat's blood, so we have this image of being dipped in blood. Then in 30 CE, Jesus answered, and he talks about Judas betraying him when he dips the sop, or he sops in the wine, which represents blood. So again, we have this dipped in blood, and then 30 pieces of silver. And then finally, in 2030 CE, we have, and he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood. So this ties them all together. And his name is called the Word of God. So this is Jesus coming back. And it looks like it's telling us it's in 2030. So if we look at Strong's 2030, eyewitness, spectator, and then of course it talks about in 2 Peter, it talks about the apostles being eyewitnesses of his majesty. And then finally in Acts 1:11, men of Galilee, these are the angels saying, why do you stand there looking into the sky? This same Jesus has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way as you have seen him go into heaven. So this is all about visualizing or seeing. And then Acts 1:11 may allude to one biblical calendar with an 11-day correction. This may be pointing us to the right calendar in order to look. Well, it just so happens that if we use those 2 days, I don't think they were used in vain. The 10:3 and 10:5, that was not the rapture, but we thought it was Tishrei 1. And if you actually plot it on a calendar as Tishrei 1, then we get a 20-day gap. And we're looking at acrostics. We're looking at the Strong's G4567, which is Satan. And if we count from the words that are meant to mean robbery, harpage, harpagmos, harpazo, and harpax, if we go from that reference to Tishrei 4567, we get 20 days. There's a 20-day gap. Then if we look from those same words to on the Gregorian calendar, there's a 22-day gap, and I don't think that's meant to mean 2022. I don't think that's concatenated that way. What I think it is it's telling us the calendar. It's telling us about that 11-11, 20-day gap, and then 22, which is 11 plus 11. Now, the precessional drift since 125 BCE is approximately 30 days. If we round it down, we can concatenate that 20-day gap with the 30, and we're told there's going to be another robbery in 2030. At least that's what it looks like. Let's go to the next day that was not the rapture, 10-5, but let's count it as Tishrei 1 on the calendar and see what happens. The days on this one, between Strong's and the furthest acrostic, 20 on the Hebrew calendar and 24 on the Gregorian. So this seems to be telling us the year 2024. Also, there are 6 acrostics, 3 Gregorian and 3 Hebrew. We get a 3-3, the year at which Jesus was crucified, died, buried, and then rose again and ascended into heaven. So there's that 33. Also, the day, 10-5, also seems to allude to the 5th Moed fulfilled in 2024. So even though we're wrong about this being the rapture, it still gives us a message, and this is all within the 84-week timeline. If you notice, the last day of this, the last day of the robbery words, is on 10/31. So this and the last calendar that we just looked at was all within 10/31, within the 84-week timeline. Now look what happens when we do, 2024, forgot about that. Look what happens when we assume 10/31 is Tishrei 1. Now the messages all fall on the outside of the 84-week timeline. So we have a message that's in addition to the 84-week timeline. We have you can see 10/31, if we consider that Tishrei 1, then we don't have acrostics beginning until 11/3. So this is all outside of the 84-week timeline. Well, if we count the days between Strong's and the furthest acrostic, that's 20 on the Hebrew and 20 on the Gregorian. 20 Hebrew, 20 Gregorian, and 6 acrostics, 3 Gregorian, 3 Hebrew. There's that 3-3 again. And then now we have 2 20-day gaps. And since there's a precessional drift since 125 BCE that gives us 30, that may be part of the message. Now we've got 2 2030s in this calendar. And that may be a second rapture, or who knows? I mean, the return, I guess it's pointing towards the return of Christ. So you've got, and the fact that this happens after 10/31, which if the rapture does indeed occur on that day, now we've got this message of 2030, and it looks like twice after that. So it's almost as if to say, hey, there's something going to happen, look forward to 2030. Okay, so 84 weeks, death to resurrection is what it symbolizes. And of course, the resurrection happening on the last day, Tishrei 1, October 31st, and that also corresponds to G206, Acheron, which can mean one end, can mean the end, the highest point, the farthest bounds. It can also mean extreme, either of the earth or of heaven. And so it looks like it's pointing out Tishrei 1 or October 31st as the high point. Okay, so what dates do we have here? We've got 10/11/24, which is the birth, and that was the asteroid, the comet Tushinshan Atlas, and that's being birthed from Virgo on 10/11. Then we have the rapture, October 31st, and then 11/27 is actually the day after all of the acrostics finish on the calendar. Strangely enough, that gives us 20 days to on the one side of the Tishrei 1, and then 27 days on the other, 2027. Perhaps there's another message in that. But if we consider just the 20 days on the left-hand side, there we have that 20 hanging out there again, as if waiting for us to put a 30 on the end of it and saying 2030 is it. So if we look at the days before all of these, if we look at 1010, which is pre-birth, this is one day before the birth of that comet. And then if we look at 1030, which would be the day before our birth, so to speak, as the child being caught up. And then 1126, of course, is the very last day of those acrostics on the calendar. And then the final, 1127, the final day, one day later. Now, the November calendar contains 5 acrostics, stating Satan is robbed, ending on 1126. And then we have the 84 weeks. I put that in there from Nisan 1 to October 31st, so that finishes that timeline. But if we go beyond, and we go all the way to 1126 and 27, we get 614 days and 615 days. So let's examine that in Strong. 614 means hid, kept secret. So this is literally telling us that this has been hidden. It's been kept secret. So we're getting a secret here. This is apocryphos. So this bit of the calendar that happens after October 31st has been kept secret. But it's not just with the acrostics. It also continues with the comet. So there are 2 places where we see something that's been hidden and kept secret. On 615 it says kill, slay, put to death. I'm not quite sure what that means. If it is 2027, then this could mean, maybe that's when the Great Tribulation starts and the massive killing starts. I don't know. Just speculation. And then if we take 1127, the day after the acrostics cease on the calendar, it says, watch, wake, be vigilant. So we got our secret message, 27 days. But it's not just that. If we concatenate that with the 20 days before the prospective rapture, then we get 47 days. And this time it doesn't mean silver. This time I think it means something to do with the Qumran scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found 1947. And 46-47 actually, because we can say 46 to the day before when the calendar acrostics actually end on 26. Okay, let's talk about that time. The difference between the time that we just found, right? We just calculated that from the precession, 8:53:50, and that reported previously. I came up many times with 8:53:23. The difference is 27 seconds. Well, it just so happens that that secret message corresponds to 27 days after the rapture. So this may be indicating or telling us to look at those 27. There's a 27 out there somewhere we need to look at. Look at how accurate this. If this is a message from God, it sure is pointing in the right direction. Seems to be very precise. I believe this corresponds to the secret message which appears in the calendar and with Comet to Sinchan Atlas, Purple Mountain, and then maps of the Earth. So Purple Mountain, perhaps us from the Earth over the 27 days following the October 31st rapture, or at least the prospective rapture. Now, we've looked at 3 7-1s before. We looked at 7-1 on the Gregorian, which was July 1st. We looked at 7-1 on the Hebrew calendar, October 3rd. And we looked at 7-1 on the Hebrew calendar, adjusting with the new moon sliver of October 5th. So we've had 3 so far, and this will be the 4th, and hopefully the final 7-1 that we looked at on October 31st. This one comes out of the Zadok priest calendar. So fourth one is a charm, hopefully. October 31st, that is Samhain and Halloween. Samhain means summer's end, is celebrated on today's Halloween. Many historians believe it served as the start of the new year in the Celtic calendar. Their New Year's Day, it was the day when the cattle were brought in from pasture. Those needed winter supply of meat would be slaughtered. Since Samhain was death night of the old year, it came to be associated with ghosts, graveyards. During this dark time of the year, It was believed that the spirits of the dead wandered from sunset until midnight. After midnight, the ghosts are said to go back to rest. Okay, so the next day, that day, November 1st, later became All Saints' Day. So we've got this death of the year, Samhain, and then we have the next day, All Saints' Day. And of course, if this is the rapture, then both days would be a part of the rapture in the world. Tishrei 1, Tishrei 2. It would happen on October 31st and November 1st throughout the world. Somewhere in the world, it's November 1st. Samhain has happier associations too, apple bobbing, which form of telling fortunes for the new year, and so on and so forth. Anyway, and then finally, John 6:40, and this, let's see here, and this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. Could this be what he's talking about? The last day of the 84-week timeline, October 31st. All right, now the second part of the secret that's been hidden, and this has to do with this Qumran Atlas comet, the comet of the century. And if you look down in the bottom, right in the middle, you'll see the comet is just on the inside of the line, just about to be birthed on 1010. And 1742 isn't anything in particular. It's simply sunset, so that we can see this happening just after sunset. So let's start this, and what you're going to see is the comet moving up through Ophiuchus and Serpents, where the serpent is being restrained while the child is caught up to God. And as it goes through Ophiuchus and Serpents, I'm going to stop it just on the other side. You'll see that the tail has disappeared, and then we'll show you the very end of the calendar, November 27th. So let's get going. This is from Mazatlan. So you see it moving through Ophiuchus and Serpents. The tail is going to get smaller and smaller until it's just about invisible to the naked eye. And then let's jump ahead to 1127, and here's where it ends up, under the wing of Achaia, which is the eagle. So we end up, or the child ends up under the wing of Achaia, under the wing of the eagle. 1127 in Strong's again is watch, wake, be vigilant. And we can do this one more time. Let's do this with the artwork turned on, and we'll do the full length of this. And you'll see the comet essentially go invisible. Starting back on 1010, you can see it moving through Serpents, Ophiuchus, serpent being restrained, tail disappears, and it's getting dimmer and dimmer and becoming virtually invisible to the naked eye, and it winds up under the wing of the eagle. And there you have it. There's the second secret. Okay, I'm posting this, and I think this is going to be the last one, because now we've actually proven it using the Zadok priest calendar, and it looks like the time really is 8:53:23 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, or Mazatlan, which would be Mountain Standard Time. And this is the time that I've been posting all along, and I never in my wildest dreams would have thought it would show up in the precession of the equinoxes. That was the last place I thought it would have been found. Anyway, and then you can see in Japan that this would also happen on November 1st, so 2 days in the world when it seems to happen. So this is the Rapture heist, and I think this is going to be it. At least I hope it is. Fourth time is a charm, right? So, okay, thanks for watching. God bless.